Now we are going to be turning to some of our allies in Texas to talk a little bit about the work that they are doing to actually partner with philanthropic partners, nonprofit partners, and also what they're doing to initiate change all the way from the state office down to communities. So Kelty, Garbee, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kelty Garbee, and I'm the Executive Director of Texas Rural Funders. We're a statewide philanthropic membership organization focused on bringing attention and resources to rural Texas. And we focus our efforts on projects that require collective action and that can't be solved by one organization alone. I'm going to start by introducing the two panelists who are joining me today. We have Kassandra Huhn, who's the Vice President of Workforce Development and Analytics at Borderplex Alliance in El Paso, where they work across the borders between Texas, Mexico, and New Mexico. We also have Lonnie Hunt, Executive Director of the Deep East Texas Council of Governments, based in Lufkin, Texas, serving an 11-county region. We're going to hear much more from Kassandra and Lonnie in a few minutes, but I want to start by sharing some background about how Texas Rural Funders got involved in this work and some state level context that will inform the conversation. In 2017, Texas Rural Funders began discussing ways to meet the broadband needs of rural regions, and we approached it very much from an equity lens, that participation in the modern world requires access to high quality broadband. And that, as you all know, includes everything from education and healthcare to applying for jobs and running businesses. So we began by reaching out to an organization called Connected Nation and funding them to conduct listening tours in rural communities across the state. Any rural community that wanted to talk about broadband, Connected Nation was willing to go there and listen. And based on what we learned, we funded Connected Nation to work with 30 communities to develop community technology action plans. This work, which began in 2019, brought communities together to survey their residents and outline their broadband needs in order to make a business case and to execute a plan for bringing broadband to their communities. And one of the most important aspects of this work was testing data speeds and mapping infrastructure in order to get an accurate picture of what is, and most importantly, what's not available in rural regions specifically. So the goal was to translate that into accurate and useful data that could be used to guide the work across the state. Fast forward to 2019, we knew three things. We knew that our legislature, which meets every other year, would convene again in 2021. We knew that Texas had no statewide broadband office and no statewide broadband plan. And so what that meant was that when communities in Texas applied for federal funds, they were automatically at a disadvantage and lost points on their applications because we didn't have a plan. We knew that we needed to address our challenges through policy, and that while we firmly believed in equal and do believe in equal access, we also needed to appeal to others through the lens of economic competitiveness. So even if we had had a crystal ball at that time, there's no way we could have known that a global pandemic would painfully expose all of the inequity in both urban and rural communities and highlight the specific challenges related to access, adoption, and use, which can differ, as you all know, in urban and rural communities. So when the legislative session began last year, we had a new set of operating conditions. And we realized that there was an opportunity to be much bolder because we didn't have to convince others or explain why broadband is so important because everyone was living it already. So two things that Texas Rural Funders did at the beginning of the legislative session last year were to commission case studies on rural communities working to bring broadband. I mean, we did this for two reasons. There are so many deficit-based stories that show what's not working in rural areas, but these stories show what is working and what rural communities are doing. We also know that stories are an important way for people to understand the challenges and the opportunities. So we wanted to be able to show the legislature that rural communities across the state are working hard to help themselves, and that they could be much more successful if there was a statewide broadband office and broadband plan. The second thing we did was partner with two other organizations, Greater Houston Partnership and Texas 2036, to form what's called the Digital Texas Coalition. This statewide coalition is focused on ensuring that all Texans have access to reliable and affordable digital connectivity. And so while it began with 3 organizations, it expanded to a coalition of 40 different organizations, all speaking with one voice. And as it became clear that there was momentum and support in the legislature for creating a statewide broadband office, there was a lot of differing opinions about where it would be located. The coalition sent a letter signed by over 90 organizations supporting the creation of an office and requesting that it be located in the office of the comptroller, which handles a significant amount of federal funding already. So I'm happy to report that the legislation passed, and just last week there was a signing ceremony for House Bill 5. So that's a victory, but the work has required and will continue to require the support and participation of both urban and rural communities and leaders as our office is established and the plan is developed. And so I want to say that I think the most important thing to recognize is that the ongoing efforts of communities who are on the ground doing the hard work. We need to continue to elevate and recognize that. And so that includes communities like East Texas, where the Deep East Texas Council of Governments, under Lonnie's leadership, commissioned a 12-county study to look at the economic impact of having broadband in the region. And in El Paso, where Borderplex Alliance is coordinating the Digital El Paso Coalition. And this is a partnership that's addressing both urban and rural broadband needs. So I'm gonna start off our first question and ask Lonnie to speak, and then Kassandra. Can you all give us a brief overview of where you are in your broadband work? Tell us about who your partners are and what the progress has been so far.
Thank you, Kelty. I'm going to start with the partners, and of course, money makes the world go around. So I'm going to start with our funding partners because we have too many partners to try to name all of them. But as far as funding our efforts so far, we've had one state agency, which is the Texas General Land Office, a federal agency, which is the U.S. Economic Development Administration, a private foundation, which is the TLL Temple Foundation. And those are really the funding partners who have helped us financially get where we are. We've also worked very closely with the 4 electric cooperatives that service our region, and they have been extremely helpful and cooperative to us. In fact, our proposed network design for what we hope to do and plan to do is based primarily upon using the existing infrastructure of the electric cooperatives. As far as where we are and what we've done, as you mentioned, the first step we took was to commission a regional feasibility study and market analysis. And we started this 3.5 years ago. No one had heard of COVID-19. We believe we are one of the most, maybe the most underserved regions in the nation, because we are a totally rural region. We have no urban centers. We have over 10,000 square miles. Geographically, we're larger than 6 complete states, but it's totally rural. And so as a result, we saw what our problem was, but 3.5 years ago, I don't think the rest of the world could grasp what we were dealing with. So we felt we had the need to prove up our case and do it with actual factual data. And so we contracted with Ericsson. And using a big name worldwide technology leader like that, I think added a lot to our case. And they developed the feasibility study market analysis, which showed us what we already knew, but proved it to the rest of the world that we were trying to get the attention of, and also gave us a roadmap as to how to go about trying to deal with it. After that, our next step was developing network design, which is the high-level desktop engineering and design of a broadband network that would serve our rural region. This is the type of thing that you have to have in order to go and successfully apply for funding from the FCC or USDA or various other federal agencies where funding is available. They want to see that you have a solid, certified engineering plan and cost analysis to prove up what you're trying to do and what you're asking money for. And the third big step, which is where we are now, is simply pursuing the money to start construction. So far, we've had one success. We've had one near miss. We have been awarded a $9 million grant, which will allow us to begin constructing our rural regional network in one of our counties, Newton County, which is our far eastern county along the Louisiana border. At the same time that we applied for the $9 million, we applied for a separate $100 million grant. If we had been successful with that, that would have been the game changer that we were looking for, because that would have funded a network that would have gone into all 12 of our counties. Wouldn't have completed our mission, which is to serve every single inch of our region, but it would have given us the framework and started providing service in all 12 counties, and it would have been a game changer. Unfortunately, we missed out on that $100 million grant by 2.5 points in the grant competition. And so, you know, these things are very competitive. In the particular competition we were going after, there was $1 billion available and there were $6 billion in applications, most of which were traditional infrastructure projects. We were trying to take advantage of this opportunity for broadband, but we got close, not quite. So we're now really getting ready to start our project in Newton County, at the same time analyzing, reevaluating where we are, where we can get funding to move the entire regional project forward. And we are encouraging our local counties and cities not to sit back and wait for us to get this done, but to look for any and every opportunity. So as a result, we now have at least one of our counties, and I think we're going to have a second one, partnering with their local telco and making an application for the NTIA funding that's coming up. So while we're trying to address this need on a regional basis, we are supporting anybody and everybody, whether it be a local government or a current industry provider, or the electric cooperatives who are not in the broadband business in our region yet, but very much interested in seeing that it happens. And we're just looking for every opportunity, whether it be regional level with us or individual efforts throughout our region. The one thing we have to keep in mind we're dedicated to is, at the end of the day, everybody has to be served. We cannot allow the cherry picking to continue, and we just cannot sit by idly and let millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of our federal tax dollars be awarded to providers who are not going to blanket cover the entire area, but continue to cherry pick. Some of that is not the provider's fault. Some of that is the FCC's fault, because they're hung up on trying to direct money specifically to unserved households. And as a result, they're missing the boat on a lot of things. But anyway, that's where we are right now.
Thank you, Lonnie. So Kassandra, can you give us an overview of your work, including the partners and the progress that you all have made?
Yes, definitely. And thank you all for the opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about what Digital El Paso has been up to. So as Kelty had mentioned, I am a part of the Borderplex Alliance, and we are an economic development organization that represents El Paso, Texas, Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Ciudad Juarez, which is in Mexico. And so our organization focuses in two areas, one being advocacy, and the second being business recruitment, expansion, and retention. And so ultimately, our group has been called to manage what is called Digital El Paso. And what I hope you notice as I talk a little bit more about our group is that a lot of this is really focused on economic development. Even the partners that we include, they're all very much involved in economic development. And so just so you know, Digital El Paso, it's a county-wide coalition of public, private, and nonprofit partners. And we were formally organized in November of 2020. And I say formally because we had a core group that was planning before Digital El Paso started meeting. And so our county-wide effort means that we have both urban and rural areas that we need to find solutions for, as Kelty had mentioned. And so our partners include the County of El Paso, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, the El Paso Community Foundation, which acts as our fiscal agent. We also have Cisco, Microsoft, the Rio Grande Council of Governments, the University of Texas at El Paso, and our local education service center, Region 19, which oversees and provides services to the local school districts. Also involved in this effort is our local workforce board, Paso del Norte Health Foundation, the City of El Paso Electric, which is our electric utility provider. And of course, we also have a couple of our local service providers involved. Since our formal formation back in November, we have established regular Friday meetings where each Friday is devoted to a specific topic. And the appropriate partner is included in those meetings. So for example, at the end of the month on our last Friday, we host, along with our nearby sister broadband group in New Mexico called Doñana Broadband, we host a learning session where we just bring in different industry leaders or people that are working in this field to come and teach us what are they doing so we can always be learning new ideas. So for example, at this month's last Friday, we'll be hearing from Dr. Guy Diedrich. He is the Vice President and Global Innovation Officer for Cisco Systems. Also, I just wanted to let you all know that we have also hosted 3 events since we started. Back in February, we hosted El Paso's first Digital Inclusion Summit, where we had Apple, Intel, Microsoft, Cisco, and MasterCard, along with our multiple local businesses and civic leaders so that they can discuss the importance and opportunities of this topic. We also hosted in the second quarter a session for school districts where we featured opportunities available with Operation Connectivity. And so if y'all aren't familiar with it, Operation Connectivity is an initiative launched by Governor Abbott and the Texas Education Agency to work to offer students in the state access to a device. And so during the session, we also highlighted 2 case studies, the first being in Ector County ISD and what they're doing with SpaceX, and the second being our very own Canotillo ISD and their project called Canotillo Connect. Now, Canotillo Connect is a project where the ISD is offering free Wi-Fi to students that can be accessed from their homes in partnership with Cisco. And then recently, we just hosted an event to overview the state of broadband in El Paso County. The County of El Paso is currently working on a feasibility study in collaboration with the University of Texas at El Paso, and we hope to have that done by the end of the year. Now, this is a great opportunity for our community to hear from the county about what their upcoming plans are and know that there is data to back up all that we're trying to do. And so along with these 3 events, we've been coordinating with our local partners to apply for grants to help fund 3 particular projects that we're currently pushing for. The first, called 79905 project, in the central part of the city of El Paso. The second being the Cotton Valley Connect project, which will target the rural east part of El Paso County. And then the third one, even though it's fully funded, the Canotillo Connect project on the west side of El Paso, which is on the outskirts of the city. And the last thing I would like to mention is that we have also been selected by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas to take part in their first ever digital inclusion cohort. So we are one of 4 cities selected from the Dallas Fed District to participate in this 3-year partnership. And so Digital Pass is extremely proud and thankful to have the opportunity with the Fed and their consultants, Magellan Advisors. But yes, thank you.
Thanks for sharing the momentum and activity in both communities. Now I want to get you all to talk about some of the challenges that your partnership has addressed and how you all did that. So Lonnie, let's start with you. And you're on mute.
Thank you. We have tons of challenges. The thing I learned a long time ago is you have to sell the need before you can sell the solution. And you can't assume that other people see the need and understand the need the way you do. And so again, that's why our original feasibility study was so important to us, because it was at a time when the rest of the world had not come to the realization, which they have now, of how important broadband is for everyone. Someone starting today, I think, could skip that first step that we did. But for us, it was really important to make our case and give us the ammunition we needed to be able to go and pursue funding and pursue partnerships and stakeholders to make this happen. Among the obstacles that we have because we are a totally rural region. We're also heavily forested. There are 4 national forests in Texas, and they're all located within our region. The 3 largest reservoirs in Texas are here. So it's very much a rural pine forest and lakes region, and hilly, and not mountainous, but hilly. And the hills and the pine forest just seem to soak up, internet signal, and makes it difficult. Because of our rural nature, realistically, I don't know if we will ever get to the point that we literally have fiber to every home. So we probably need to have a multiple approach solution, which includes as much fiber as we can get and a strong fiber backbone, and then probably wireless delivery to some of the more hard to serve, more remote locations. But right now they have nothing. So if we can get them a 100 megabit wireless signal, that's a home run for a lot of the people in our region. Another obstacle we have is we're a historically depressed region, high unemployment, high poverty. In just about every socioeconomic index, we rank low. Health outcomes, educational attainment. We've seen ourselves falling farther and farther behind. Of our 12 counties, it's 11 now, but we're still working with the 12th one, so I'm going to say 12. But of those 12 counties, 9 of them have had a decline in population since the last census. We're waiting on the new census, but most of our communities are declining in population. It's all about jobs and economic opportunity. And so we have to figure this out and get everyone access to broadband, and things like healthcare and educational benefits. Those will come, and everything, it's like the rising tide lifting all boats. That's what we're looking for in our region. We fall a little farther behind the state and national averages every year as far as economic statistics and various other statistics. Broadband is the key to turning that around. We won't catch up with the rest of Texas and the rest of the nation overnight, but with broadband, we can start to narrow that gap and gradually start to catch up and close the divide.
Kassandra, can you tell us about some of the challenges that your partnership has addressed so far?
Definitely. So you're gonna hear it, and I know that Lonnie had already mentioned it, but really the issue is identifying the need, like really pinpointing the need. So as communities are doing work in the broadband space, there is a barrier we encounter, and that being the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC maps. So these maps, they review broadband access by census tract. So if there's a person on that block that has access to broadband, they consider the whole area served, which unfortunately is not the case. So in order for us to be able to apply for pools of funding, or to even make the case that an area needs to be served, we actually need to take the steps to be able to challenge those maps. And not only do those maps come into play, but also our proximity to Mexico. So you might not be able to see, but like down the street, Mexico is right there. In case you all haven't been here or been in the area, we are on the westernmost part of Texas. We are along the U.S.-Mexico border, and our sister city in Mexico is called Juarez. So to give you perspective, if you were flying into the area, it literally looks like one huge city with like a little divider cutting through it. That's just how close we are. And so in some parts of El Paso, especially in the rural parts of El Paso County, there's an overlap where our residents would have a better signal coming from Mexico than they would in the US. And so how do you deal with that, right? Well, we are taking all these factors into account with the feasibility report and market study being done by the university, which is being funded by the County of El Paso. So ultimately, we can challenge the maps and come up with a strategic way to approach getting our entire community served. This also plays into Digital El Paso's vision of becoming the largest binational connected community in the world. So yeah, a lot of things. Of course, once we hopefully set really strong roots here in El Paso, and like I had mentioned before, there is a Doña Ana Broadband group that is doing work in Doña Ana in New Mexico, right next to us. We are also going to start looking at ways that we can start working in Juarez, Mexico, because like I mentioned, we're a whole region and we want to make sure that all residents in our region have access to broadband. But another thing I wanted to point out to you all is, as many other communities probably already know, we also face the issue of making sure that residents know what resources are available to them. So one way that is currently being tackled is through a program that is common to border towns called the Promotoras Program. So our culture, the Hispanic culture, it's very influenced by relationships, or very tied to relationships. So what these promotoras are, they are well-known individuals in their respective neighborhood, and they share programs and resources with the residents of that neighborhood. So they are a trusted individual, and they have that relationship and can persuade people and show them that they can actually take advantage of stuff that's available to them. One example of this is what we're doing in the 79905 project, right, where we're trying to actually upskill individuals in the whole digital space. So the Promotoras program initial goal was to serve 150 individuals and have them complete a credential in the span of a year. Within the first 2 months, 175 people completed their credentials. So it is a very effective program, at least for our border town, and we will probably take advantage of that as we continue to work in different pockets of the area. But yeah, those are two kind of areas that we see that there's problems in.
Thank you both. So this next question, I'm going to recap some of what I heard from you all. You talked about jobs and economic opportunity being so important. So my next question is, what will having broadband available enable in your community that's not currently available? So feel free to go into a little bit more depth if you want to give anecdotes about jobs and economic opportunity, or if there are other things that it will enable, please share that as well. And Lonnie, we'll start with you.
Jobs. The regional feasibility study we did, and this was a conservative estimate done by Ericsson, says that if we can flip that proverbial switch today and light up our region with broadband, and we know we can't just flip a switch and make it happen overnight, it's going to be over a period of time, but if we can bring broadband to the entire region, we will create 10,000 new jobs over the next 10 years. In a region of about 385,000 residents scattered over 10,000 square miles, that is definitely the game changer. That will have a ripple down, I won't say trickle down, a ripple down effect on just about every aspect of life. Education, healthcare, among the other issues we have is we have a lack of doctors in our region. The solution could well be telemedicine. But the problem is you can have the best internet connection at your doctor's office or at your medical facility, but if the patient doesn't have equally good broadband where they are, then you might as well just be talking to your doctor on the telephone. You've got to have the two-way connection. The real benefit of telemedicine is that the doctor actually can see you and hear you in real time, just as if you're sitting there in their office. So we don't have a big problem with hospitals and medical facilities having broadband. The problem is the patients don't have the broadband. Same thing with education. During the pandemic, in urban areas of Texas, they were able to do a lot more than we were, even though I know they still had a lot of challenges and issues. But our teachers, our schools were not able to do remote telelearning because too many teachers and most of the students did not have access to broadband at home. So while other schools that were served by broadband were able to do online classes and online lessons, our schools had to prepare paper homework packets. In some cases, the schools sent school buses out and delivered those homework packets. In other cases, the parents drove by the school and picked up the homework packets for their kids, went home, tried to help their students with their homework as best they could, and then turn around and bring the paper homework packets back and turn it in. It just was not a very good solution to dealing with remote education during the pandemic. And while the pandemic, we hope is, we're coming out of it, we don't know what the next big disaster is going to be or what the next big issue is going to be. And even if it's not a disaster, our students are just missing out on too many opportunities because they do not have access to the rest of the world.
Thanks, Lonnie. Kassandra?
Yes, so if we are looking in the El Paso area, right now we know that 1 in 3 households in El Paso with a median income of $35,000 or less do not have access to a broadband subscription. We also know that lack of access is a barrier that can lead to a deficit of digital skills, which contributes to a lower interest in sciences, lower testing scores, and a lower interest in higher education, right? So this is an economic development issue and a workforce development issue. Having these current barriers reduces the potential of our labor force, right? And it keeps our residents that don't have access stuck in their current situation. And so as we're looking to bring new companies or help companies expand, or even just help our residents move up the social ladder, this is something that we need to take into account. One thing I'd like to point out is that many of our students are first-generation students. And so this means that they will be the first in their family to graduate from college. And in some cases, some of our residents or students are the first ones to graduate from high school, which is an awesome achievement. So our schools and our community as a whole wants to make sure that those individuals are supported, right? And our goal is to have the highest social mobility rates in the country. So one example of this is an effort shown through our university, the University of Texas at El Paso, which was ranked #1 in research productivity and social mobility by the Brookings Institution, right? And so really that's one core thing that we are trying to push for. But of course, on top of all of this, a lack of digital skills and a lack of access to a device is an issue for our working students. A lot of our students are having to work while they go to school, and imagine taking care of their family with school, with working full time, and then not having access to it. These things just continue to compound. So if we can support them in any way we can, we want to. And then of course there is the elderly population that we want to also make sure that they have these digital skills and they have resources to utilize. But there's so many subcategories of people that we also have to consider with our broadband efforts. But, it's always just chipping away at different programs or different ways that we can engage them and make sure that they have access to all of this.
I mentioned earlier that House Bill 5, which supports a statewide broadband plan and a broadband office, very recently passed. What will having the broadband office and the broadband plan do for your communities?
First of all, it was an absolutely necessary piece of legislation. We're thrilled, and we're thrilled that two of our local legislators carried this legislation in the State House and Senate. So we're very pleased. The devil is always in the details. Kassandra mentioned the mapping issue. Having accurate maps is going to be a huge help for everybody in the state of Texas. And that's one of the things that we are hoping and believing will come out of this. The other thing is just having a plan. The very first funding we looked at was USDA Reconnect program. And once we started looking at the notice of funding, it became obvious we were going to be penalized. I forget if it was 5 points or 10 points, but there was some number of points that you got if your state had a statewide broadband plan, and you didn't get the points if they didn't. And again, the competitions are so competitive, we didn't have a chance to get that money without a state broadband plan, so we could check that box and pick up those extra points. So that will certainly be a huge help. The devil is in the details. So a lot remains to be seen. One concern I have is we just have to try to make sure that our legislators and our agency personnel in Austin, don't let the existing telecommunications industry overly influence what they do, because, you know, we understand, I'm not being critical of anybody. I understand the existing telecommunications companies are for-profit companies. They have shareholders to answer to. They have to make a return on investment. But what I also understand is, in a region like ours, there are too many residents that will never be profitable. Even if you could get enough money from the federal government to build out the service, they wouldn't be able to sustain the service. The only way to sustain that service is by putting those people inside a larger group and using a cooperative or a nonprofit type model and leveraging a larger population to be sure that every single resident in there is served. And so I'm hearing a little bit of feedback like, well, you got to be sure you don't give anybody any of this new federal money that's going to overlap with an existing service area. There's nothing wrong with overlap. In our case, there's a lot of people that have no service right now, but there's a lot of other people that have one option and they pay 4 times literally more for it than what our neighbors in Dallas-Fort Worth pay for their internet service. And they get poor service because there's only one option. Giving that rural resident or urban resident a second option is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with having some overlap of service areas. That is a positive thing in the United States of America, in my opinion.
Thank you, Lonnie. Kassandra, what will it do for you all in El Paso?
You know, it's hard to follow Lonnie after that, because he really did hit most of the points that, you know, we'll also be facing as a community. But, you know, along with the obvious benefits of House Bill 5, right? So you're going to create a state broadband office. You're going to have a broadband development program. You're going to have a broadband development account, a state broadband plan. You know, I'm just truly thankful because this bill does keep the topic of broadband alive and at the forefront. You know, Texas was one of 6 states that did not have a broadband plan, and the world is continuing to be more and more digital. And by the state passing this bill, it allows us all to recognize that broadband is a necessity, especially with continued work from home options and 5G. Right, but I also did want to thank Kelty and the group for what they did to put together Digital Texas, right? So Digital El Paso did support House Bill 5 through Texas 2036. And in case some of y'all aren't too familiar with it, right? In 2036, Texas turns 200 years old. So this particular nonprofit organization looks at the effects our population growth will have, or what effects population growth will have on our infrastructure, water supplies, schools, healthcare, and economy. So it was just a really great opportunity to find a funnel to be able to, you know, continue to discuss this topic even at the state level. But yes, I think the topic won't be alive forever, but I'm happy that right now it still continues.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one final question and then invite everybody who's listening in. If you have questions, go ahead and type those to us and we will get to them. We have about 5 minutes. And so with the last question, I want to ask Lonnie and Kassandra, can you talk about what lessons you've learned that you would share with others who are just starting this work?
I would say, first of all, if you're not already planning, get busy planning. It's amazing how you can sit and think, well, we don't have the resources, we'll never get the funding. Once you actually get a plan together, in our case, doors started to open and there were opportunities. This one grant that we got and the other one that we came so close on, if we had not already been well underway with our network design, we would not have been able to meet the timetable to turn around an application for that grant. So don't wait until someone drops money in your lap, get busy planning. The other thing is, you got to be sure it's strategically and well thought out plan, a well thought plan. There are going to be lots of current providers and wannabe providers who all have an idea of what you need and what your community needs or what your region needs or what your state needs. You know, they all have their own, not always objective view about what the solution should be. And so you've got to be sure you cut through that and be sure you get independent expert advice to help you develop your plan and pursue it. And of course, this goes without saying, but it still needs to be said every time we turn around. Keep politics out of it. If you're successful in what you're doing, it won't be built overnight, which means you will have to start somewhere. Somebody's going to get service before somebody else. The worst thing that can derail your project is for people to think those are political decisions. You're favoring one community or one neighborhood or one county. So if you plan properly and execute your plan, all the choices and decisions will be made for you. You do what makes sense, you do what the funding source allows you to do, and you go about it in a methodical process, keeping in mind that at the end of the day, everybody has to be served. I use this as my example. This little card represents our region, where we're headed right now with the current funding, and lots of funding is coming into our region to other organizations. What's going to happen when they get through spending? One company just got $91 million under RDOF to build new service in our region. What's going to happen though when they get through? This is our region. These circles are going to be the people who have service. And if you're not inside one of those circles, you're still not going to have anything. We've got to get everybody on board with the idea that we have to have blanket coverage. And if you're going to take substantial amounts of federal or state tax dollars, you need to make a commitment that you're not just going to fill in the circles, but you're going to fill in the whole blank. I'll quit preaching now. I'm sorry.
No, Lonnie, to follow up on you, which again, very hard. I'm feeling the same things over here in West Texas, but ultimately for anybody who's wanting to go into this type of work, you need to understand that this is a long-term project, right? Management of your respective coalition is going to be the hardest part about moving forward with this. Like Lonnie said, opportunities will show themselves, but you need to make sure that you are organized in a way to actually take advantage of those opportunities. One thing that we notice is that we don't want our group to grow too fast, right? Of course, you need particular partners in the community, but you really need to establish that core group so that you can make decisions quickly, because opportunities, they come from one day to the next. And so you all need to be able to move fast. You also need to make sure that your partners are engaged and they know how they're contributing to the effort. You know, they need to have that sense of that they've contributed to this. And this is especially true as a topic of broadband begins to fade, right? At some point, it's not going to be in the spotlight, but the work still needs to be done. Another thing we've learned is let your partners run with the projects, because of course you don't want to act as a gatekeeper when you don't need to, or delay projects because we're on a time crunch. You know, we just want to make sure that you have that relationship with them so that they're doing, so what they're doing is shared with the centralized group. And you want to make sure that partners aren't duplicating efforts. Instead, make them aware of what each other is doing so that what they're doing can have a benefit multiplier to the residents. The third thing that we've noticed is that you should really have a great relationship with your local utilities and planning departments at the respective municipality, right? Doing asset mapping is going to be extremely helpful when you're looking at setting up or requesting funding for certain projects. You know, the topic of dark fiber, which we haven't been able to really get into, is really important as well when they're planning out streets, or even with TxDOT, our local, Texas Department of Transportation. When they are building roads, make sure that they take into consideration putting down the lines for it. But just lastly, you need to keep the resident in mind, right? It's just like marketing. Who is your target market and what are their characteristics? Really, not every solution is that you come up with is going to make sense in every part of the community. This work is by no means something that you can, just take a cookie cutter approach to fix. There are too many players in all of this. So you need to divide the community into action areas and make use of the appropriate resource for their needs, just like we did with the Promotoras program. But it's a lot of work, but it's very fulfilling and you can see the impact that you're making, right? Because this will have a multiplier effect to us in the years to come.
Thank you, Kassandra and Lonnie. So I saw that there was a few questions. We are at time, so we can answer those in the chat for you. I hope you have gotten a good perspective of a community in West Texas, a community in East Texas, but how there's some very similar challenges and a lot of work to be done, but some great progress. So thank you, everybody, for participating, and we will sign off and we'll make sure to answer your questions in the chat before doing that.